What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's tutorial. We are going to talk about biomechanics, and I'm going to make this really simple. I'm going to make it really fun and easy to understand so that you can kind of wrap your mind around how our body moves and performs at its best, kind of through the lens of functional biomechanics. Okay, so here we go. Thanks for joining me. My name is Linnea, and I am the owner and founder of Limber Arts, Pilates and Personal Training, which is a studio here in Olympia, Washington. And I also do a lot of stuff online, whether that's one-on-one instruction or other kinds of classes and programs. So if we're talking about biomechanics, it's, probably this is going to be more for my movement professionals, my other personal trainers or Pilates instructors out there, athletes, or maybe just sort of like outdoorsy performance, fitness addict kind of enthusiasts. You guys will definitely want to listen up, and really anybody who wants to learn how their body works, get out of pain, understand maybe why their imbalances are the way they are. So that's what we're really going to get into today. And we're going to make it really simple. We're going to make it really fun. We're going to make it really just like hopefully kind of easy to understand. Okay. So I have a few different ways for you to think about this. Okay. And the first kind of image or analogy I want to use is of a trampoline. So if you picture a trampoline, right, it's kind of bouncy and you go down and the whole thing goes down and then you bounce up, right? So we could kind of call biomechanics, we could explain it all through the lens of a trampoline. The whole thing is designed to just go down and then up. And that's basically that simple. There's kind of like this spectrum of movement that goes all the way from the very bottom of the jump when the trampoline is kind of closest down towards the ground and it's kind of pressed down. And then there's this spectrum of movement that goes all the way to the top of the jump where you're like way high up in the air. And obviously you could do a flip, you could do the splits, you could do any kind of different variation of like how you jump on the trampoline. But to understand the biomechanics of it, it's really just that simple. It's just this spectrum of movement that goes from the moment when you're kind of at the lowest part of that bounce and all the way up into the jump. And what I love about this analogy is that it teaches us how important it is to go both directions through that whole spectrum. You can't jump up high, like you can't jump as high as you can on a trampoline if you're just on the ground, right? The trampoline makes it easier to jump higher. But why is that? The whole reason you can jump higher on a trampoline is because you can go down lower, right? So to understand the biomechanics there, it's like most of us get really focused on just like wanting to jump higher, right? And so we focus a lot on jumping up, or wherever we're trying to go, but we need to look at that full spectrum of maybe being able to go down lower in order to then bounce back up higher. So that's a little bit of an example for you. You can kind of think about that in terms of whatever exercise you're doing next, whatever movement you might find yourself doing, even if it's just out on a hike and you're walking up a hill, you might notice how you have a little bit more power to, take a big step up when you bend into your knee and bend into your hip a little bit more, right? Like that's how we get the power to take that next step up. Okay, so that's the first example. The next example I want to share with you guys is basically just the example of breathing. Okay, so we all breathe, and it's, again, just kind of this idea of this spectrum, all the way from the inhale, all the way to the exhale. So let's say that you are a shallow breather, right? Like I know when I'm stressed that I tend to not breathe very deeply. It's easy to kind of breathe up into your neck when you're stressed, right? And kind of have this shallow breath. And a lot of times when that's the case, or just kind of a lot of different approaches to breathing practices will focus a lot on trying to breathe deeper, right? Like take a big, deep, long breath in. But if you're somebody that breathes into your neck and you try to take a big, long, deep breath in, it might just kind of increase the tension in your neck, for example, right? It might just kind of increase that pattern. So this is an example of kind of how movement and biomechanics works no matter what we're talking about. is we can either try to do more of what we want to be doing, or we can kind of reverse engineer it and look at the other end of that spectrum, right? So in the breathing example, if we look at it, we're like, when do we start breathing in? When do we start inhaling, right? The answer to that is going to be at the very bottom of the exhale. So another way to be better at breathing in is to get better at breathing out. It's not that complicated, right? It's pretty simple. We just don't usually think about it quite like this. So if you take an exaggerated long exhale, you get every little shred of breath out of your lungs. If that's where you're starting from, that's going to give you this longer spectrum to have more time, more capacity, more length, more space to be taking a breath in. Okay, so we tend to get so focused on the goal. Oh, I want to get here. And so we try to just go that direction. But sometimes we have to look like, oh, where does it start? Can I give myself, like, reverse engineer a more efficient starting point to kind of catapult you in the direction you want to go? I hope this is landing. The breathing example makes it a little bit more tangible, right? Here's another example, right? So these are a little bit more practical. Let's say you are knock-kneed, okay? So it's very common to have this posture where instead of your knees kind of being straight, it's very common to have a knee that kind of rolls in towards the midline. So instead of a straight leg, it'll kind of dip in towards your other leg, right? We call that knock-kneed, just general layman's terms. And so what so many approaches to therapy and corrective exercise focus on is taking that knee and pulling it back the other direction, right? We don't want it to fall into the midline, so let's pull it back over here, right? So that's interesting because in this kind of example that I'm sharing with you guys, this full spectrum of movement, we need to understand why the body isn't willing to go back over there. It has a reason, right? Why is it just kind of listing towards this farther end of the spectrum without ever being able to come back over to this other range? Like, if we want a healthy spectrum of movement is like all the way from the left to the right, and then all of a sudden our capacity kind of tends to just start to live over in one spectrum of the movement, right? And in our effort to correct that, we try to just force it back the direction we want it to go. So if we take a pause for the valgus knee thing for a second, and we think of 3 cups. This is my last example for you guys, okay? So 3 cups, right? 1 cup, 2 cups, and 3 cups. And you're pouring water into each of the little cups. Each cup represents a different direction of movement, okay? So we are 3-dimensional beings. We are 3D creatures, even though I'm on a screen right now, which is 2D, right? But movement happens in a 3D environment, okay? And that means that we can do something like twist, and it also means that we can do something like side bend, and and then we also have kind of this forward and back motion, right? And those 3 cups together create this symphony of movement. And so you can think of these 3 cups as needing to be equally full. Like, each of them need to be balanced so that there's an equal amount of movement in each of those 3 cups, right? And then within each of those 3 cups, we want to be able to fully experience that complete spectrum. And if we have something like a knee that is rolling in and kind of knock-kneed and doesn't, it's not able to kind of experience that full spectrum of movement, part of what we can do is start to look at those 3 cups of movement and say, which one's missing? Why isn't it, is there a balanced movement here? Is there a balanced movement here? Is there a balanced movement here? And it gives us more to look at, right? So we know we want that knee to be able to experience like living in a little bit of a different pattern that's a little more straight and not just knock-kneed, right? But the tendency in a lot of therapeutic modalities tends to be to try to just kind of like force it back in the direction that we want it to go, whether that's through exercise or massage or manipulation or different things, right? Like that's kind of how we tend to focus on it, is like just make it go back over there. But if we look at this full spectrum of movement within these 3 cups, it gives us a lot more to look at, to understand in a holistic pattern of movement, you know, what's happening at the foot, what's happening at the hip, what's missing from this full spectrum of movement that's preventing the environment that would allow that knee to be able to kind of like almost have permission to experience that full spectrum again, right? Like if that knee was given the environment where it could access its full spectrum of movement, it probably would. So instead of forcing it, the idea of kind of simplifying biomechanics for you and where this can really apply to like what are you going to do with this information, right, is just to basically switch your thinking a little bit. I challenge you to switch your thinking. If you find an imbalance in your body, if you know you've been working on an injury for a long time and maybe it's not really getting better, does it help you to think about biomechanics in this way? Does it change the way that you think about your body? Does it maybe open up a little bit of space for you to wonder, like, oh, what is that spectrum of movement in this part of my body? Or how does that work? What other elements might be involved here? What are those other cups that might be involved that might not be allowing my body to move in a way that is optimal, in a way that is pain-free, in a way that's really going to drive like peak performance, right? And that's a very different lens to take than just sort of saying this imbalance is wrong and I need to change it and I need to kind of force it to do this other thing that would be better, right? So it gives us a lot more to look at and to work with and essentially to understand. So I hope that's helpful for you. It's definitely a little bit nerdy, so if you're kind of like a movement science nerd, then you'll love this. Feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues who you think would enjoy this. And thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.